Welcome to All Things Policy, a daily podcast by the Takshashila Institution. We are a bunch of policy nerds based in Bengaluru, and we like bringing fresh perspectives to Indian affairs and Indian perspectives to global affairs. So grab a cup of coffee, sit back, and join us for today's chat.
Hi, and welcome to another episode of All Things Policy. I'm Malathi Renati, and I head the policy school at the Takshashila Institution. And in today's podcast, we will look at age fraud, doping, and coaching challenges that sort of plague the Indian sports ecosystem. And we have none better than our senior sports journalist, Mr. G Rajaraman, to give us a glimpse of where things stand currently. Let me just quickly introduce you to Mr. Rajaram. He's a sports communication professional. He comes with a rich 40 years of experience and has a treasure trove of knowledge in the sports ecosystem. He's just a handful of sports communication professionals with diverse multimedia experience. This includes, daily newspapers, news TV channels, websites, and also reporting for different sports organizations. He's also written a book titled Match Fixing: The Enemy Within, and more recently, he was the media attaché to the Paris Olympics. That's the 2024 Olympics. So welcome, Raj. Wonderful to have you again on the podcast.
Thank you so much, Malathi, and thanks to the Institute for doing what it is doing for sports policy in the country. Truly grateful for that. I speak not only as a journalist, but as a student of sport. We need more such conversations. So I'm so glad you've taken very critical areas to have as subjects for the podcast today.
Thanks, Raj. So once again, welcome everyone to today's episode. So broadly, we're talking about, I would say, very uncomfortable but deeply connected issues in the Indian sports ecosystem. And especially over the last couple of decades, this has surfaced more, and it's kind of creating a bit of a havoc, I would say, in the recent past, right? So one is age fraud. The second is doping. And the third is the coaching culture that has evolved over a period of time. And we're not going to be looking at them in a vacuum, because on the policy front, only over the recent past has all these three topics found a place on the conversation table, right? But the problem statement and why these three areas are important is that this Indian sports ecosystem kind of interconnects these three areas in a sort of a vicious cycle in a way, and it also undermines the athlete's development as a result. So we're looking at age fraud, which is very commonly originates at the grassroots level, where older athletes will, frequently with the collusion of coaches and parents, because at that age they don't know otherwise, the documents are forged so that they can compete in junior events. So then what happens is that once they start dominating these junior categories and securing scholarships and jobs eventually, and early accolades as a result distorts the talent pipeline. Right, it's now pushing genuine young athletes aside. It also causes it's like a deterrent for others who would want to get into the system, and eventually it creates a culture of shortcuts. And obviously, it normalizes all this unethical behavior, and that's very sad, because you're inculcating something in a child, in a younger athlete, which will kind of taint, in a way, their career, right, going ahead. And one of the key stakeholders in this is also coaches, because they're incentivized by these quick wins, the financial gains that they get with, from manipulating success. And the athletes might also be steered towards doping as a result. Okay, so this is just a backdrop as to why this is a problem. And it's very important, because eventually sports and the integrity that it should be played with should be a non-negotiable, right? And that's something that we should never compromise on. Right. So we'll start looking at each of these areas. The first one would be age fraud. And so Raj sir, this is where I'd like to kind of get your inputs. You've been very vocal about age fraud, right? And so for our listeners who may think this is just more of a paper problem, can you explain how age fraud actually works in practice, and why it's more than just a few kids maybe fudging dates?
Look, I'll be very honest with you, Malathi. Sport comes from a society. Sport is not played in vacuum. Sport is played within a society. And if there is corruption in society, tend to get reflected in sport as well. Yeah. Now, sport offers a tremendous pathway for many to attain success and to be known around the country and perhaps in the world as well. So there are lots of young athletes whose ages are fudged by 2 to 4 years, and they're competing in different age categories than their own. Now, when you get credit for succeeding at the junior level, either you get college admissions or you get jobs based on what sport you've played and what level of achievement you've got. You get jobs. Now, after that, what happens is when these people get into the senior ranks, they find competition very, very tough and they fade away. Two things are happening here. One is that a lot of people have invested in your growth as an athlete, including government of India, maybe your own state government or the municipal corporation or sponsors. And then suddenly that investment has gone dry completely. It's gone waste because you're no longer competing at the senior level. The more important thing is you have denied somebody else,
Right.
somebody who deserves to compete in the right age group and who's competing in the right age group. You have denied that person, that athlete, a chance to win at that level. And what happens is even this athlete gets frustrated and goes away from the system. So there is a lot of draining that happens because of age fraud. Unfortunately, we don't see this as a criminal problem. We have to see this as a criminal problem. When I'm fudging my age certificate, when I'm fudging my Aadhaar card these days, and I have known cases of athletes who have got multiple Aadhaar cards. In fact, the CBI is investigating one athlete who has multiple Aadhaar cards. So it's very interesting to see even the Central Bureau of Investigation get interested in a case like this. It's very important for us to criminalize age fraud. There is a very popular case I know where the Supreme Court has said you cannot discuss this anymore in public. Discuss what happened some years ago with an athlete because that athlete is no longer a junior. Now, we have tended to protect some of these athletes because they have risen to shine at the international level at a later stage in the senior category. But I think we have to treat it as a criminal offense and perhaps penalize people who are indulging in this, whether it is parents, whether it is coaches, or whether it's the athlete himself who's doing it, himself or herself. I think it's very important for us to draw a line and say that, look, we don't want champions by hook or by crook. We want them in a proper manner. When society starts demanding that, government, market, people, everyone falls in line. But I think the fault lies with us for accepting this as something very common because it is there in society, in civil society as well.
So true, right? And we look at people looking at shortcut to get to their goals. Yeah, I can see how that's prevalent. So I just want to give a broad overview of the policies that have been in place, right? And in all these three categories, unfortunately, pre-2000, so we're just looking at 25 years ago, right, is when actually, even from the policy side, the government started looking into this. So prior to 2000, everything was, I guess, it was a free-for-all in all these three areas, right? Age fraud, doping, even coaching or even certified coaching and things like that, right? So in age fraud in particular, pre-2000, it was a very fragmented practice. There was no central policy. So age verification was left to individual federations and tournaments. And often they were relying only on school certificates or self-declaration. So there's a lot of trust there, right? So as a result, it created a wider room for overage athletes in the youth categories. And we need to keep in mind that over the last 2 or 3 decades, right, now the onset of having birth certificates which were in place are more common now. If you were to go back some 50 or 60 years ago, that might not have been the case because, birth certificates are never issued so they should just guess the person's age, right? But now it's different. So after 2000, around 2010 is when the first national code against age fraud in sports, that's the NCAAFS, was introduced. Again, this was the first time that it came out. So Sports Ministry then issued this in 2010, and it set out guidelines for the federations, but not to include, it did not include any penal provisions for athletes or officials, like what you were referring to, right? That was not the case in 2010. The focus was more on encouraging medical age verification. So I think they use hand wrist X-rays, a TW3 method, I think it is. But the implementation was again weak and very inconsistent because it was relying on the federations, which again didn't have any incentive as such to deploy this. Then coming to 2017, so 2010 is when the first national code against age fraud in sports came about. 2017 onwards, SAI-led age verification drives came into place. And so thousands of athletes were scanned, especially those identified for Olympic development. So when you're looking at the pathways to the elite level, detecting age fraud at the development stage was sort of critical, right? Because you wouldn't want to showcase that on the world stage. 2018 to 2019, this was the time when Kalo India came about, and also the National Code for Good Governance draft came about. This is where the federation level actions actually started rolling out. So BCCI also, they kind of disqualified over 1,000 junior level players for falsified age records. Because now remember, we need to keep in mind money also was coming in, right? It was becoming more commercially viable. The All India Football Federation, it introduced its own age verification procedure for age group competitions. And so that came into place around 2018, 2019. And it's only 8 years later, that is only last year, where the revised national code against age fraud in sports, the first one that came out in 2010, the revised draft has been issued. And of course, the Ministry of Youth Affairs and Sports are kind of have put it out for public, in the public domain for consultation. And the features here, and I'm just going to mention this, and Raj sir, please do add if anything was missed. But they were mandatory documents. So the 3 documents essentially for aspiring or registered athletes. One was the birth certificate, which now should be in place, the Aadhaar or the passport or any other ID, and the school certificate. So they require these 3 to be had to be provisioned. There was also now AI assisted and biometric age verification tools that they want to introduce. This will kind of reduce that manual error. So you're looking again at the wrist thing, and they're also adopting AI based bone age assessment. It's called, I think, a bone expert, if I'm not mistaken, and also MRI scans. And the penal bit comes in here, where you're looking at a 2-year ban for first-time offenders and a lifetime ban for repeat offenses. Again, the provision for a one-time amnesty window for existing athletes to self-declare also has been brought in, just so that people can come out clean about it. So these are the things that they have proposed. So keeping all of this in mind, Raj sir, what is your impression? Do you think this will, because we are at a time now where we've got the Commonwealth in our kitty, the hosting rights for that, the next one, Olympics is around the corner, and we hope to host that. So we need to also ensure that our system is clean, right? And so how much of an impact would this have, should it even come out this year?
Purely from an international reputation perspective, I think doping has got a greater reputation than age fraud has on international sport. If Indians send people who are not qualified on the age category to compete, you get insulted internationally. So nobody ventures there.
Okay.
I think what typically happens is people who are overage compete at the national level, and sometimes they don't go and compete at the international level. And even if they do, it is not often detected, because they leave it for self-regulation. But doping is where international ramifications are there, and the repercussions can be quite serious. But sticking to age fraud, I think what needs to be done, nobody's going to be repeat offender. So if you are offending the regulations once, if you are violating the regulation once, your name should be out in public domain.
Right.
The Athletics Federation of India publishes a long list of athletes who are overage and are ineligible to compete in certain age categories.
Right.
Now, what the National Code against age fraud in sport suggested was that you can't compete in an age category where you are fudging age, but go and compete in you're not thrown out of sporting ecosystem. You don't want to lose talent, but you go and compete in a higher age category where you're eligible according to science. Now, people were competing. Now, if you're going to ban people for 2 years, you're probably losing out on talent.
Right.
So I think what needs to be tightened is how birth certificates are issued and how Aadhaar cards are issued. How can one person have multiple Aadhaar cards and compete on different names? You do have the biometric for Aadhaar card. So if you tighten it up a little bit more, I think a large part of the problem will be resolved. But I think essentially it has to come from deep within ourselves as a society. We need to stop encouraging people from fudging age and competing in a junior age category where they don't truly belong. Until we have this awakening in society, we wake up once in a while where a big name surfaces as being caught in age fraud. It seems like a daily occurrence. It seems like a commonplace thing in Indian sport. But if we can ensure that we cut down on the number of people who are indulging in age fraud, I think we will be moving in the right direction. So a ban for 2 years is just about fine. I don't think there will be athletes who will try and fudge their age a second time. Like in doping, where people have tried multiple times, not just once or twice, people have tried multiple times. In age, if you're caught once, you're caught once. But there should be some kind of a national register available where if I'm a track and field athlete who's been caught for age fraud, I should not go and compete in the same age category as in swimming or in badminton or in tennis. I think there should be a national register. We don't have that. And one of the problems is a reluctance of even government agencies. I know a case, there was this young sprinter. I'd rather not take his name, but we talked of him as the Usain Bolt of India. No, he was probably 18 years of age, around 18 years of age. He was sent to Jamaica to train and came back and competed in the Khelo India school games in 2018. And later, the Athletics Federation of India, when he was competing in the National Youth Championship, they discovered that he was overage. Now, Sports Authority of India, which conducts the Khelo India Games, was reluctant to take any action against this athlete. It left it to the federation. Now, you must set example. I mean, if as an event manager, as an event owner,
right,
you should penalize an athlete who's been caught for age fudging in my event, right? I should not leave it to somebody else.
True.
And I think this is where we slackened a little bit. If you're serious about fighting this evil of age fraud, of fudging age, then it must be done on war footing. We should not leave it to the next person to deal with the issue.
Agreed. Yeah.
I think it's critical that we pay attention to who should be punishing and have a list of all the athletes who have ever fudged age.
Absolutely. And I think this is where the typical case of who'll mind the minder comes in, right? So the federations are not doing it and then they're passing on the ball to the government or SAI, then it's a problem. So I think here even the federations should be penalized if they find any athlete within, because they're not doing the due diligence. At the same time, you mentioned about the database, and I think this is really important. Each federation should have that database of all athletes who are part of different events that are being conducted. And then, of course, SAI too should have access to that database, right? So it's between SAI and federations, and then ensuring, like you mentioned, society too plays a bigger role. We have validated birth certificates and Aadhaar card. And so I think those are the areas where we could kind of tighten things. And the unfortunate part is that you're inculcating or encouraging unethical behavior in a youngster, leave alone an athlete, right? In a youngster. And tomorrow when they they get into a different career, let's say, right? And they know that taking shortcuts, they've been able to achieve something. I mean, that doesn't augur well for the citizens of India as well, right? So I think it has a larger implication. So I think this is a good time to also just segue into doping, which is, as you mentioned, right, it's assessed even more strictly at the global level. So, Ratsa, when people hear doping, right, they often think of big international scandals, right? But in India, a lot of the conversation is about the gray zone. It's more about supplements, it's more about performance aids, and more informal advice. And so how entrenched is this culture at the grassroots and the national camp level?
It is very clearly at the grassroots. I mean, it cuts across all lines. We've had international athletes being caught when they're traveling or when they've gone overseas to train. We've had instances of athletes being testing positive for doping at the international level. But we also have massive numbers of minor athletes who are competing in junior national championships and in state championships who have also been, and this is not just in track and field, this cuts across disciplines. There are a number of minors in weightlifting and wrestling and boxing who have been caught for doping. So it's a pandemic, so to say. At the moment, there are more than 600 Indian athletes who are ineligible to compete in sport. They're facing a provisional suspension, or they have agreed to a 3-year sanction with the National Anti-Doping Agency. They have admitted doping and agreed to a sanction, or they have contested the charges laid against them and have been penalized anything from 2 to 4 years to 8 years, depending on the gravity of their offense. So there are 600 athletes who are ineligible, 600 plus athletes who are ineligible to compete. And that's a really large number.
Elite level, Ratso, at the international representing?
This is across the board. This is across the board. Because the National Anti-Doping Agency can test anybody who's playing sport in the country, even at the amateur level. For example, Bangalore has got a 10K run coming up in just a few days. The National Anti-Doping Agency can go and test athletes who are competing in the 10K run in Bangalore. So they can test any athlete who's in the system. And a number of these athletes who of the 600 are probably athletes who have not risen even to the elite level. They're probably at the development level. Most of them will probably be at the development level, and some of them are obviously at the elite level. But the numbers are really large, because what happens is the World Anti-Doping Agency is keeping track. There is a central system called ADAMS. If every test that is conducted in India or anywhere else in the world is registered on ADAMS. So World Anti-Doping Agency has got a database. It knows the number of tests India has conducted, and it knows the number of positives that have come up.
Right.
Last year, for example, there were 130 positives in India. It was 260 plus the previous year in 2024. In 2025, it has come down to 130 plus. So there is a lot of effort going on to try and stop this evil from spreading even more. So two ways of doing that. One is to educate the athletes at the grassroots level, at the development level, and at the elite level, not to indulge in doping. And the other thing is to test them frequently. In both areas, we're probably a little weak. We have tested more than 7,000 athletes, 7,000 samples last year in 2025. And that's a very good number. But there are countries which have tested 29,000 in 1 year. So we are some distance away from some of those countries. But 8,000 is 8,000 is a reasonable number to test. And to have about 4% positives coming up because of that in some years, and now come down to 133 out of 7,000. It's putting in fair effort, but it needs to pull up its socks even more.
Sure. Valid points, very, very valid points. I'd like to extend that to not just the athlete being educated about this, but also the support system around them, right? These are the coaches, the parents, and to let them know that there is also long-term health impact for those who are exposed to doping for longer periods of time. Also, India has a shameful reputation of actually topping the doping charts worldwide for 3 years on the trot now, right? So keeping that in mind, on the one side, people are saying that's good in a way, because that means, as you mentioned, that with the numbers, there are more people being tested. As a result, we're identifying more positives. But at the same time, it showcases also that this problem is it's systemic, right? It's across different events as well. So one thing that was very ironic is that in the recent union budget that was presented a couple of months ago, that the National Anti-Doping Agency, that's NADA, the budget allocated actually dropped from 24 crores in the previous budget to 20 crores. And likewise, the National Dope Testing Laboratory, NDTL, which does all the testing. And I suppose this is the one that reports to Adam Raj. So I think this is where they take the data from, right? This also dropped, the budget dropped from around 28.5 crores to 23 crores. So I wonder why it's being done at this point in time, when actually it should be the other way around. There should be more focus from the government as well. But that's something that sort of leaves me a little confused as to why that's happening. But so in a sense, even if India's medal count is improving, and these repeated doping related stories sort of undermine our global sporting power, right? And that's where we want to reach along with the Viksit Bharat. How do you think that this plays out with respect to our Olympic bid?
Just a couple of things before I get to the Olympic bid, for sure. One is, we talked about how we are conducting more tests and therefore there are more positives. I think we've spread it too thin. We go and conduct tests at absolutely at the bottom, including in a state championship and in a junior state championship, which is the right thing to do. But if you're going to test a number of junior athletes and some of them are going to show positive, obviously your percentages are going up, obviously your numbers are going up. Therefore, you seem to be number one in the world. But we also need to understand, Malathi, that countries like the US, for example, and I'm not speaking against them, but I'm trying to understand the system. I'm trying to share what I know of the system. Sure. The US collegiate system is not within the purview of the US Anti-Doping Agency. Now, it is the biggest pathway to international sport. NCAA is the biggest pathway, is the one route for international competition for most athletes. Now, if those athletes are not going to be tested by the USADA, then your numbers are going to be low. And that, I think, is something which the World Anti-Doping Agency has to take up. We tend to get hassled that India is number one, but we must study other systems. We must study what's happening in other countries as well. Why are some countries like Italy or Turkey, which used to be on the top, how have they managed to come down? I don't think we study that often enough, but we seem to cloak ourselves in shame and say that, oh God, India is number one. I'm not saying what India is doing is right. Absolutely wrong to be number one in the world. But I think we all need to understand how the systems function, what's happening in the US and what's happening in European nations. And why is it that every person who ever tests positive for a prohibited substance is penalized? I'll give you an example. Some years ago, this country had 136 positives. I'm not talking about India, I'm talking about another country. It had 136 positives and only 36 were sanctioned. Can you know 100 athletes were let off because either they had a medical certificate to prove that the medication was absolutely necessary, including for asthma, right? So we need to understand, the world needs to understand how some of these systems function before we start berating ourselves. I'm not for a minute suggesting that India is right in doing what it is doing. Obviously, Indian athletes need to stop doping, but we also need to understand what's happening around in the world. You spoke about budgets, Malathi. I think the number of tests will remain the same. It won't go down because World Anti-Doping Agency will frown on the number of tests. Probably the education patterns will come down. They will focus more on online education rather than send educators around the country. So I'm guessing that if there is a budget hit somewhere, it will be seen more in the education part rather than in the testing part. So I'm not too worried about that. As far as the Olympic campaign is concerned, you can be sure some other countries will keep raking this up. They will talk about it as a negative for India. They will talk as if all of India's athletes are doped and we are winning medals at the international level. No, we are not. Right? So our doping is more at the bottom level, at the middle level. It's not so much at the international level. I don't think other countries should worry too much about the fact that India's got a higher number of positives than any other country over 3 years. But I think in 2025, India has dropped down significantly. We must look at current trends rather than look at the past too much. The World Anti-Doping Agency has been a little slack in releasing some of the stats. It came at a bad time for India because India is bidding for the Olympic Games in 2036. But I don't think it should matter too much in the overall scheme of things. Obviously, there are some concerns within the International Olympic Committee about the high incidence of doping in India. But it is not as if you will find doping in when India is competing at the highest level. You find many of the athletes doped there. Definitely not.
And that's a fair point. I think the yardsticks we use, as you mentioned, and even the sample sets that are collected in each country, right? I think that's crucial because just looking at the data independent of that won't be fair. It won't be an apple-to-apple comparison, right, in that sense. So thanks, Raj, for bringing that out. We'll just look at we'll move into the last bit about the coaching culture that we have. And we all know that there are more power hierarchies in Indian sport. So how does the coaching culture connect with age fraud? And this is more for our listeners, with age fraud and with the use of drugs or supplements. Could you maybe just give our listeners a kind of a broad sweep on that?
I think that both are connected, both age fraud and doping, and some of the coaching is connected because coaches also reap a harvest, right? Every time their junior athlete wins or every time one of their athletes goes and wins substantially, they get either promoted or they get a bonus as a reward. So there is a monetary reason for them to encourage young athletes from doping. I've known only 2 coaches who have been banned by the National Anti-Doping Agency. For example, there was one coach in Bombay who actually injected a prohibited substance to a young athlete who got the Khelo India medal in 2020. That coach has been banned for 4 years. More recently, a judo coach has been banned for 6 years. Now, these are the only 2 known instances of coaches being banned. I think it's a positive step that coaches who indulge in corruption, coaches who cause grief for the nation rather than bring us joy. I think they need to be penalized, and that is beginning to happen. But it is all got to do with money rather than anything else.
Right.
And if we can stop paying huge amounts of money to junior athletes for winning at their level,
Yes.
then I think we will curb a lot of the evil will go out of the window, because money is at the root of everything else. Either athletes get jobs or they get good college admission. And if as a coach, I have helped somebody to get a college admission, then I reap a reward as well. So if we can curb that a little bit, we will have succeeded in ensuring that we have a better coaching culture.
Right.
Having said that, Malathi, in 65 years of existence, the National Institute of Sports in Patiala has produced 25,000 coaches. Now, these are not coaches of any great quality. And I'm sticking my neck out here when I'm saying this. If your grassroots level coaches are not good, they're not educated enough, they don't understand the art and science of coaching,
Right.
then we're not going to produce champions. If I don't teach the right fundamentals, the right basics to a young athlete, if I don't imbibe the right values of friendship, respect, and excellence, the Olympic values in those athletes, if I don't encourage them to be ethical, then I'm making a mistake. Now, most of the coaches who have come out of NIS Patiala in the last 65 years have not produced great athletes. They have opened little bank accounts for themselves, and they're probably making money. And why not? I mean, everybody needs money. But this mission drive to produce champions, to have Indians going out there and winning at the Asian Games and at the Olympic Games, that mission needs to come back into the coaching system.
Right.
Without good coaches at the grassroots level, you're not going to have a good creamy layer at the top.
Yeah, absolutely right. And I think the three areas that you called out, more of the authoritarian coaching, which sort of has to go away so that it develops a good bond between, and trust also between the athlete and the coach. The power dynamics is another area. And coaches like not being professionally trained in ethics, in sports science, or even in child protection norms, right? These problems then become very systemic. So this is an area that, that once it's brought out into the open, right, and they will start seeing less of it, because it's now these are conversations that people are having. They're not just brushing it under the carpet. Yes, sir, please go ahead.
So it's important for government to have a good ecosystem for coaching. It's important for them to understand that if we don't have good coaches in schools, you're not going to produce great champions. I'm not saying what happens is, despite the system, this is a good enough system. It has produced us so many Olympic medals and Asian Games medals. But if you want to rise to the next level, then you must go to the schools and have professional coaches there. Now, who's coaching in the schools? It's the physical education director.
Right.
I have the highest respect for them. They're wonderful people, but they're physical education teachers. They're not athletics coaches. They're not badminton coaches. They're not tennis coaches. They're not wrestling coaches or boxing coaches. So if every school in this country can invest in 2 NIS coaches, and if the government can support with 2 more coaches, the government subsidizes the coaching program in schools, our sporting ecosystem will get a lot better. Right now, there is no coaching happening in schools. Everything is happening in private academies or in institutions outside of schools. The moment our schools, and I'm talking about the whole width and breadth of our schools, if they can invest in coaches in their own schools, we will see India rising to the top. There is no dearth of talent, but it needs to be shaped well. We need to teach them the right fundamentals. And when they rise to the top, all the coaches then they need to do is to sharpen their match sense, their game intelligence, rather than teach them the fundamentals all over again. And I think that is where India is going wrong. If we can invest in coaches at the grassroots level and reward them suitably, I think India will become a great sporting nation.
Yes, absolutely. I think the reward as well as the respect that the coach should have, right, even in that whole hierarchy is important, because many who would take it up because they're passionate about it might not get the respect they deserve. We know the typical case of the physical education teacher not being even called for a PTA meeting, right? Versus a maths teacher or an English teacher who will have a better, they're higher up in the pecking order, so to speak, right, in a school. So I think that's where as society too, we should start to, as parents possibly, start asking the schools that we send our children to have these things in place, right? Like as you mentioned, the coaches, and obviously where there's a demand, there will be a supply. right? Even and there's no dearth of money. We know that. At least in the private sector, private schools, there's no dearth. So it has to start there. So unfortunately, we're sort of running out of time as well. But to wrap it up, Raj sir, if you had one message for policymakers, federation leaders, and sports administrators in India, what would it be about the link between these three areas that we spoke about, right? Age fraud, doping, and the coaching culture, and related to India's global sporting image? What would you say?
It is not a message to any of them, but it's a wish of mine that we move from just writing down policies. We must find ways to actualize some of those policies. Our sports policy has been in existence for a long time. We have been talking for the longest time about reviving school sport. I don't see anything happening at the ground level. It is a nice policy. It's nice to sit in a policy document, but we must make policies that are actualized. For example, the National Anti-Doping Act has been in existence for nearly 4 years now. It has been amended once, but it is not acted upon. You haven't seen a National Anti-Doping Agency governance board come into play.
Right.
You've not seen it become truly independent yet. That vision is there on paper. So for a number of years, we've had beautiful vision, lovely documents. But what are we doing about it on ground? So we must start actualizing some of these policies. It's not as if there's a dearth of policies. I think we've got good policies in place. Just need to action them so that we become a better sporting nation.
Absolutely. I think the challenge of implementation is always across the board. Right? Yeah. Thank you so much. Thank you, Raj sir, for your unflinching look at how age fraud, doping, and the coaching cultures sort of shaped India's reputation as well, both locally as well as at the international level. So thank you once again for your time. I know this is a topic which requires maybe a few other podcasts to kind of really look at the nuances, but this is, I think, a great start for someone who wants to understand where things stand currently in the Indian sports ecosystem.
Thank you so much, Malathi. These are subjects that people usually don't wish to talk about. These are touchy areas to talk about. So thank you for giving me the platform to share some of my thoughts. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Raj sir. And thank you to all the listeners for joining in. Bye-bye.
If you liked our show, dive into Takshashila's research on technology, strategy, and economic affairs. Check us out at our Twitter handle @TakshashilaINST or our website takshashila.org.in.